Hello and welcome. I had some air dry clay that's been sitting in my art room for years, and one evening I very impulsively decided just to make something. I had an idea that goes all the way back to a high school project I did years ago where we were tasked with creating a new creature by combining two or more animals. This new hybrid still had to be able to eat, sleep, move around, all that type of thing, and we could use any type of material to make it. I came up with several ideas back then, but one of them was a character I called Simon, a mix between a moose and an American settler. The idea of Simon stuck with me, so years later, here we are. The armature came together just as I had pictured in my head, especially the face. This project is really just a way to ease back into creating art after such a long break, nearly 10 years actually. So there's no expectations. I just want to experiment and have fun with clay, because the only time I can actually recall using it was probably when I was about 8 years old. I think I made like a little trinket bowl. So the air dry clay that I'm using for this is a brand called Plus, and the clay feels almost ready to use straight out of the bag, so I didn't spend too much time kneading it. Just enough to warm it up and get a feel for it before starting to apply it to the armature. I use a section of an old curtain rod to roll out the clay here. And then I also transferred Simon onto another board that has cling film on it, so I can just wrap the sculpture when I stop working. This is to help slow down the clay drying, but also keep all the dust from the clay contained, hopefully. I'm adding some shape to the base, and the idea is that Simon's got these really long nimble legs that help him collect like materials to use as bedding later on. So he goes around collecting blankets, fluffy socks, scraps of yarn, bits of tweed, threads and ribbons. All sorts of fluffy soft things. He loves to cover himself in blankets as he thinks that will make him less noticeable, so that's the vibe I'm trying to go with here. Simon just ambling about with his stuff, trying to figure out where he wants to build his nest. So after shaping the base, I added some mismatched socks to each of his legs by wrapping the lower part in clay. This part was a bit fumbly to get the edge of the socks to blend together nicely along the seam, but there's not much room for my fingers to work in inside the section of his legs. I am pretty impressed at how flexible the clay is while wrapping it around such tiny legs though. But you'll see me using gloves almost always, and this is just personal preference. It's not because the clay is like toxic to handle or anything like that. I added some blankets and scarves around his legs and then finished off for the evening by making a little Rolo pillow for some detail. The next day the tops of the socks have dried but also cracked slightly horizontally, which is not too bad, but you can see the colour difference in the clay where it's dried above the crack at the top and where it's still wet below. I feel like all the mistakes are going to be happening on this one. Anyway, I added an extra blanket to the base and then made a bigger one to wrap around his body. I'm changing the plan as I go, so I'm not going to add as many details as I wanted. I'm sort of steering this project more towards testing rather than making. It became a bit more evident that the body was probably on the small side, so I decided to add some ridiculous mud flap things to his sides. I made them basically just stand away from his body and just be a bit awkward so that I can see how much they're going to sag when they dry, and then also just to test attaching the clay to itself. I may try break these or pull them off when it is dry as a strength test, but it doesn't really matter to me that the body looks silly now. If I want to, I can just sort of revisit and make a new body for him. So moving on to finishing off making the head, I've used some googly eyeballs just because this is a fun project and the eyes fit the look. It's less piddling about that I have to do with the clay as well, so I gave him a pretty funky hairstyle to make up for my laziness and then put his head on his body and left him to dry for the night. I did check on him a few times before going to sleep, and he seemed to be doing okay until really late when I noticed that his face had started with a minor crack. So I just spent a little bit of time filling it in with clay and left it to dry. So this bugger has cracked a lot more overnight, but while I was fixing the crack on his face, I made these little things just to test out some paint. They've cracked on the edging, but I'll see how much worse that gets as it dries as well. This test is now officially called the How Bad Does a Crack Crack When a Crack Cracks test. But going back to Simon, his body cracks are worse than I expected. I did anticipate some cracking and what have you, but from behind it looks bad. So here's his butt crack, and along his sides he's also got a hell of a lot of crack there. I just want to finish up though, and the last few details just need to get done, and then I'll leave him to dry completely. I just make a little pouch for him to carry around, and then also make a broom end for his long and sweeping tail. I move on to trying to make a traffic cone for one of his antlers, but I must have spent about an hour just shaping, overshaping, reshaping, and finally I ditched the idea. There's nothing more frustrating than getting nowhere on a project, so while I was having lunch, I just opted to put some ends on the wires just to stop them from being so sharp and jabby. I wanted a handlebars theme because having long trailing ribbons on my bike was so simple, but so satisfying and rewarding as a kid. And here's Simon all dressed up and nowhere to go. He's going to sit and dry for a few days because I actually need to get some acrylic paints. I don't use acrylics, and Simon was a very spur of the moment, so I'm not 100% prepared for it. I paint in oils normally, so I'm just going to get a cheap small set of acrylics as I really don't want to try painting oils on clay. Oils are going to take forever to dry as well. In the next video I'll show you Simon getting painted, but that's pretty boring, so I'm also going to actually discuss about the artist who inspired my art teacher to give us this project initially, and then just some general musings and thoughts on his ideas and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye.